All right, we're gonna finish this off. Sorry it's taking so long, guys. And then we'll start another commentary because why not? Um, we left off with this question, so I think I backed it up to the question itself, where I want to start from to sort of finish this off, and see. We'll go from there. I'm curious to see what's gonna happen.
I presume, and I know to some degree, that your concern with the meaning crisis is reflected in your personal experience. And so I'm kind of curious about how that made itself manifest in your life, but also how it was that you came to understand that there was a pathway forward and how you're communicating that.
So, as I said, I was brought up in not only in a nuclear family, but an extended family with a very fundamentalist kind of Christianity. And only, I would now say, I wouldn't have said it then, but retrospectively looking back after therapy, by the way, I did extended Jungian therapy, that it was quite traumatic. I think some of the most horrific experiences of my life were around that. I belonged to a version of it that had a notion of the rapture. And I came home once when I was 10 and there was nobody home. And that was a very rare event. First time it had occurred to me, I'd come home from school. And I was convinced that everybody had been raptured. I had been left behind because I was clearly a sinner, condemned to the Antichrist and to hell. And for a 10-year-old, you can imagine how horrible that is. Or I remember when I was reading the Bible, I came across the passages that talk about the unforgivable sin.
Right.
And I was just riven with anxiety. And my mother, trying to help me, took me to the pastor of a church, and he gave me the most platitudinous, useless. And even as a 12-year-old, I was able to recognize,
right,
you're useless. Well,
I'm glad John mentioned this story. He's mentioned it in the past. I'm familiar with that story. I guess I need to lay out a bunch of things because I don't know why, but apparently, okay, everything that happened to you in your childhood is traumatic. Sorry, that's definitionally that, yes. Right? Because you're in a time of constant change. And it's not necessarily that the world is changing, although that can happen too, but you're changing. And a lot of people don't remember most of their childhood, partly because it's trauma. Sorry. I don't know why this would be a surprise, but apparently people don't know this. It's how it works for everyone. Just saying. And that's why, telling your children that Santa Claus is real is not a big deal, right? Because it's all trauma. Like, yes, it is. That is factually correct. I hope this really isn't a surprise to anybody. If you haven't thought about it that way, fair enough. But like, hopefully now that I've pointed it out, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Everything was new. Everything was different. And sometimes new and different feels good, especially when you're an adult and you're bored. But at first, new and different, especially when you're young and small, is not good. Like, it's just like, whoa. The first time I went in a company all hands meeting and heard the executives blithely talking about breaking the law because they didn't know. It was like, how are these executives this stupid? Oh my goodness. Companies are run by stupid people. Help me. That was traumatic. It really was, actually. I was like, what is happening? Right? My first experience as an adult even, right? With realizing a C-suite exec had no work experience. He's been like an executive. And I was like, what even is this? He didn't work his way up? Isn't that how everything happens? Because when you're a child, you work your way up, like physically. You work your way up into the world. That's how it's supposed to work, right? And so you have that pattern in you. And so, like, I was traumatized as a child. It's like, well, welcome to adulthood. I don't, like, this is the most banal thing you could say in the world to some extent. And yeah, it's too bad. And somebody gave a 12-year-old platitudes. Okay, the problem with that is that people give 12-year-olds platitudes all the time. And you know what? 90% of the time it works because they're not precocious, like John is, clearly, and was, right? And John's just not a normal person. His intellect is very high, right? He's reasonably smart, even by my definition. And he has a high IQ. And so platitudes work on children most of the time. Most children. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. And sure, if you're not one of those children, you're traumatized. Okay. I'm not going to get into all the things that traumatized me as a kid or an adult then, because wow. When you can do things that other people can't, and then you realize that, and that they weren't lying to you, they're just incompetent or lazy or stupid or incapable or just can't see things. All of those things independently and separately, very traumatic, my friends, very traumatic. So I get it. But also, like, put this in some context, right? Like, I mean, if this is Jungian therapy, I got questions. Yeah, these are not traumatic events. These are events that happen to most people. And maybe they're traumatic, like I said to John, because he's an outlier, and fair enough. Like, sure, whatever. Also join the club, because I don't know too many people that didn't have traumatic somethings in their childhood. And just, I think part of what I want to call it, modern culture or something, is we have availability of the TV family, and what we consider problems has changed. And we think problems are like being beaten, or starved, or, living poor, or, being made fun of for the fact that we're poor or something like that. Whereas, as I've outlined, pretty much growing up is trauma. Sorry, it doesn't matter if you're wealthy and your parents are nice to you or whatever. Odd that I would go off to my grandmother's funeral and then see a bunch of things about my whole family much more clearly, and then come back and then get this. I don't understand the universe. I really don't. Also delighted. I mean, you can tell I'm absolutely delighted about this. It didn't occur to me that even this story would come up. So this really is like, whoa, okay, weird set of coincidences that I would be called away before I could finish this and then pick it back up here after my experience. Oh my goodness. So I want to make that clear to people. I like one of Peterson's early stories is about a woman who said she was, sexually abused by her brother. And then eventually Peterson works out that it's like, wait a minute, how old were you when this happened? And so they were both children. And so the awareness of the incident didn't occur. Of course, girls tend to mature faster than boys, for example, and different people mature at different rates. So, like, averages are helpful, but they don't always do what people want them to do or expect them to do. So it was traumatic to her, and it was sexual to her, maybe, or more sexual to her than it was to him. And so until she sort of figured it out, Peterson said, like, oh, maybe it was just, boys and girls playing and, nothing more, right? There wasn't an intent behind it. Then she was able to recontextualize and, fixed a bunch of things in her life. Right. So, yes, you were traumatized as a child. Everybody you know was traumatized as a child. Maybe that helps you move on. I don't know. I had a bunch of things that I should have been traumatized about, I guess, that I wasn't correctly traumatized about. And everybody sort of expected something different. And I was like, what? I don't even think about that incident. Sorry. The world is strange. The world is very strange. So yeah, don't overfocus on trauma. It's not healthy. It's ironically.
I was a fan of science fiction because I was always intrigued by speculative thought from very early on. And I read a book by Roger Zelazny called Lord of Light that introduced me to Buddhism and Hinduism and the power of myth. And it opened me up, and I rejected Christianity. And I became that person you were criticizing earlier, the very antagonistic atheist materialist.
Yeah, well, that's a very standard pattern of reaction, and it's.
Wow. Well, there you go. Western Buddhism. I just did a video on that that I just released, so I'll link it here. This Western Buddhism idea as an escapism from Christianity, from the Christian hierarchical framework. Yeah, and then Peterson saying, yeah, that's a common pattern. This is excellent. This is excellent. This is Peterson at his best. That's right. This is a common pattern that we fought. Pattern. Somebody talk more about patterns. Maybe I don't know, figuring out how to get around them, notice them, navigate them. Yes, that'd be a good idea.
I mean, I've seen that in the atheist community. I mean, there's two things that make someone a committed atheist, as far as I can tell, speaking generally. One is the rational problem that you described, the inability to reconcile the claims of any given mythos with say the scientific viewpoint, or even with the nihilistic or hedonistic viewpoint. That's one thing, but that's not enough. It's very frequently the case that people who turn in the atheist direction are traumatized by bad religious actors of one form or another, right? The Pharisaic type. Oh, yeah. Well, Christ himself was killed by the religious hypocrites, essentially.
We talked about this
a lot in the God. Yeah, well, it's a cardinal part of the story. It's so interesting to see this. Is the worst harm, obviously, in a sense, the worst harm is done by people who harness the best possible ideas to the worst possible end.
I was very grateful that Dennis was there, because Dennis and Greg were both continually holding us back from an easy anti-Semitism that could come.
Yeah, right. That's another danger, of course, or a casual antithesis to any other creed, because you see that within denominations as well. Right, it's not a good answer.
I look, maybe it's just me. I don't know. Mostly French, Irish, and Greek, actually. Easy anti-Semitism. What is easy about? I really literally do not understand a statement like that. I don't know what's easy about that. I don't know how that would be. I don't know. That's a weird statement to me. I don't know why that would be easy. I mean, it sounds like some sort of unconscious Heideggerian justification, to be honest. I don't know what to make of that. I wanted to point it out. I don't know why it would be easy to call out one group over another, especially within Christianity. It makes no sense at all. And if you think it does, I got questions.
And yeah, it was very illuminating to me to think more deeply through the significance of the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers. The lawyers are those in the gospel story, are those who use the law as a weapon. And boy, there's plenty of them running about at the moment.
Oh, they would call that legalism, by the way, nowadays, right? I mean, we've sort of expanded the legalism because it's not necessarily a weapon, but as we'll say, a mode of understanding the world, which I would relate to the materialism. And I have a video on objectivism, individualism, and materialism. I guess I'll link it here because those three things go together somehow. I'm not quite sure how. They always seem to be with one another. And that's part of, and I guess my argument would be, legalism is a form of fundamentalism. They're indistinguishable, effectively, except maybe in their canonical texts or something like that, where they're drawing their canon from.
Moment. The scribes are basically academics who use their intellect as a destructive force, like the postmodernists, and then the Pharisees.
Oh, that's interesting. The scribes are intellects. They are. And one of the things we talked about in the past couple of weeks was that, maybe the scribes are kept writing so they don't interpret. Yes, I think so. Right. So I don't know that the postmodernists are a good example of, we'll say, bad intellectuals because it's too narrow and too obvious. Yeah, they're all pretty bad people, like, sure. Which always begs the question for me, why would you listen to them? Ever? but okay, we'll slide right past that obvious sort of issue. I think all intellectualism skews that way, right? I think what we're outlining here is a general human behavior problem, but let me let him finish, I guess.
Pharisees are the religious hypocrites, and they're the enemies of the logos, right?
Oh, religious hypocrites. Okay, so he's putting everything in 3 buckets. Well, I like 3 better than 2. No oppositional processing here. Opponent processing denied. We have 3 buckets. There's no positive buckets there. Religious hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is hard for me to nail down, guys. I got to tell you. Usually when people describe hypocrisy, they are conflating it with arrogance. And they're using the pattern of, you're not doing what you say I should do. Okay, but if hierarchy is real, then who cares? Right? In US law, for example, you cannot sue the president while he is sitting in office. Not that he is above the law, but law is actually delayed. You don't get a right to a speedy trial when you're president. Oops, that's actually a disadvantage for the president, by the way, because the good of the country demands the temporary subversion of the law, or temporary, what do I want to call it? Pausing of the law, right? In other words, the justice for the president is different than the justice for average citizens. In that way, the justice still happens, it just happens on a different time frame. So they're not getting around anything, but a clear exception is made. Well, is that hypocrisy? No, it's not. It's different rules for different people in different places, right? Hypocrisy is just hard to identify. So I want to highlight that. And usually when people are talking about hypocrisy, talking about person doing something that they know nothing about. It is evident in their, in the experience of watching them do it, we'll say, or experiencing them trying to implement something. That's usually what people are actually talking about. But a lot of times people are just complaining about the fact that different rules for different people at different places and times in their life. Okay, but also, right? I mean, yes, you believe the cop over the drug dealer on the street. Of course you do. Does that mean that's always the right answer? No. Is that hypocritical? No, it's not. You have to have a preference. So a lot of times just sheer preference or sheer statement of hierarchy is cast as hypocrisy. I disagree.
Right, and yes, obviously.
D.C. Schindler, my friend D.C. Schindler, talks about misology, the hatred of the logos. It's a good word.
Right.
So anyways,
right.
I left and I went through a profound personal meaning crisis, deep nihilism.
How long? For how long?
For about 3 or 4 years.
How old were you when that happened?
Sort of 15 to like 18.
Right. Well, it's interesting too, and I would say significant that you turned to science fiction. That definitely happened to Elon Musk too, and it happens to a lot of smart, rational people who lose their religious connection. And I think it's because the science fiction contains the emergence of a new mythos,
well,
right?
Especially the new wave that I was reading, people like Roger Zelazny. I mean, Lord of Light is about a planet where people have sort of mutated themselves and done sort of hyper technology, and they've assumed the roles of the Hindu pantheon. And so Hinduism, and so this is one of Zelazny's themes about the relationship between myth and science and philosophy and religion. And so I was deeply interested in all of this. And then I got to university.
Heinlein does the same thing with Stranger in a Strange Land, right?
Because,
and it's so interesting because Musk named his AI Grok after Valentine Smith, right? And that's not accidental. You can see that mythos re-entering the engineering sphere in the guise of science fiction.
Wow. Okay. So there's actually a lot here for me, which is why I didn't pause it sooner. I needed some time to gather my thoughts because this is actually somewhat revelatory for me personally. given the theories that we work on here, or hypotheses, I should say, that we work on here with navigating patterns in the Mark of Wisdom project. So my thesis, and I've stated this publicly before, is that modern science fiction is as close to ancient Greek philosophy as you can get. And the thing that struck me was, well, that's sort of validated here by Peterson to some extent. I mean, not directly, obviously, but he wouldn't frame it that way. I don't think John would either, by the way. I don't think they see it that way. But the implication, and the reason why I think it's now way more supported than it was, we'll say, 2 minutes ago, is because Peterson talked about emergence from the sci-fi in light of the loss of or betrayal by religion. And that actually really bolsters my point from my perspective about modern science fiction being the equivalent of ancient Greek philosophy. And the reason for that is that ancient Greek philosophy appears to be very well grounded in whatever pagan religions or religion was around during the time the philosopher was writing. They typically use religion to justify, we'll say, things that are not justifiable logically, reasonably, and rationally. If you need some evidence of this, I have a video. Watch The Lies of Plato's Cave. I give you all the references in there for how we're misreading Plato's Cave, because we're doing this sort of individualistic thing. And if you read Plato's Republic, you'll realize that often when the character of Socrates reaches the end of logic, reason, rationality, they make an appeal to the gods. Like that's what. But surely this must be true, else Zeus, whatever, or Hera, whatever. It's quite funny, by the way. And so even for the ancient Greeks, the underpinnings, the verification, and the sort of point from which they're standing, right? The justification for their philosophy is explicitly, clearly religious. And you know that everybody up until Immanuel Kant, and probably after, knew this, because Immanuel Kant famously says, philosophy should not be the handmaiden of religion. It's like, well, you can say that, but what if the world is constructed such that you have no choice? And that's really the argument since then, right? I mean, this is why you shouldn't read anything by Immanuel Kant, because his 4 major suppositions are so stupid that continuing with his work is absurd. Sorry, but actually also true. So yeah, I mean, this is a huge problem, right? Because Kant begins the critique of critique, and which is just self-reference garbage. Hello, don't do that. Yeah, you can't apply the thing to itself. It would eventually lead to nihilism and death. Like, you can do this on a computer. So it's hard to replicate in the real world or on a computer. The rock that beats the rock. Yeah, then you have no rock. They both vanish. Sorry. You have a lot of sand, I guess. So there is this sense that, wow, science fiction, once you reject religion, allows for an emergence is good, or emergence first, or emergence is primary framing of the world. That sounds dead on to me, 100% predicted by our work, actually. So I'm all in. Also, you check out our work, because this is not a surprise. Probably didn't see this. It's hard to see without the right framing. One of the things I'm trying to do on the channel is give you good framing. I noticed one person in particular watched my early model videos. You really should watch those. I think they'll really help now.
It's not a triviality. So, okay, so you got turned on to philosophical and theological ideas.
I took an intro to philosophy course, and we read the Republic, and I met Socrates.
And what did that do?
Well, see, the thing about my upbringing is it had left a taste in my mouth for the transcendence, missing a sage, if I can put it that way. And then I met this figure of Socrates who made the logos come alive and gave me a new way of understanding rationality and made me a way of understanding spirituality and transcendence in a way that was consonant with my burgeoning interest in science and reason. And that
right, so that was a defragmentation process.
Profound. That's why I will not follow. Okay, I will not follow any religion, any pseudo religious ideology, any political vision that says you must abandon your loyalty to Socrates. That's not going to happen for me.
Holy macaroni. All right, so you can see the defiance, the rebellion, the resistance. I've never met a religion that said you had to abandon your loyalty to Socrates. I don't know what that would look like. I'd love to hear John's take on what would cause that to happen, John. Certainly in Christianity, since it adopted, quote, Neoplatonism, if that's a thing, which it most certainly is not, adopted Socrates, and therefore you wouldn't have to abandon your loyalty to him, but you rejected it anyway. I don't find that the Republic is a very and maybe John is sort of shortening the story here, and the Apologia or something plays more into this, which I have not read much of. The Republic is, while an introduction to something about Socrates, I would not say is the best introduction to Socrates. Plato's, the author, Plato's usage of Socrates and the Socratic method is sort of poor in the Republic, because the framing is that, Socrates is already awesome and we're not going to be able to argue our way around him, and therefore we're really just having a discussion rather than a dialectic exploration of a contentious topic, maybe. I mean, the purpose of the Socratic method is not to do, we'll say, the work that's done in the Republic, because the work that's done in the Republic is perfectly rationalistic, right? And there's a basis for it. Like, he's making axiomatic claims, usually, as mentioned earlier, based on the gods. For real, read it again if you didn't get that. It's right there. It's clear as day. Whereas the Socratic method is more about, we'll say, destroying sophistry. There's not a lot of destruction of sophistry in the Republic that I recall. Maybe none, in fact. But destroying sophistry is sort of Plato and Socrates' favorite pastime. Right, because they're the most hated people. They're below actors, even. Because they pretend to be philosophers and they're not. Right, they pretend to know things and they don't. Right, there's none of that in the Republic. So, or at least not much, if any at all. So I mean, maybe John's compressing a bunch of history and just used Republic because it was top of his mind. Fair. Also, I'd want to hear more about this. Like, I don't understand where this defiance and resistance. I mean, you can see it in his face. Like, this, not going to do that. No one asked you to. Now, interestingly, he's brought this up before, and the point that I just raised has been raised to him before. On a previous video, he was talking to Pastor Paul Vanderklay, in fact. And Paul was sort of taken aback, like, who where in, quote, Christianity are you told to abandon Socrates? Like, that's Christianity barely knows about Socrates, but likes him. So most Christians would consider him Christian, even though he's pre-Christ. I don't know where the conflict is, but he's certainly pretending like there's a conflict, stating that there's a conflict, and proceeding as if. So I wanted to point that out because I think that's vitally important for you to understand. I wish John and Jordan understood it.
That's not going to happen for me.
And okay, and so what was it specifically about Socrates that attracted you, do you think?
Well, there was a lot originally, I thought, but see, Socrates talked about that himself. He talked about how he seduced people into philosophy, right? Because at first it was, oh, look, he wins all the arguments.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
And that, you know, when you're a first-year student and you're coming out of high school in the meaning crisis, right? That's very appealing because then you can, you know, but then you realize the people he's defeating are the sophists, are the people who are after the Philonikeia, not philosophia. And then you realize that he criticizes himself as much as and you get drawn into this and you get caught up in this process of self-correcting and self-transcending and doing it with other people dialogically, getting caught up in, like, you know, Jesus talks about...
that's it.
All right. All right. So, yeah, you can see, right, he's fighting the sophists. Sure. I agree. That doesn't happen in the Republic. But he's fighting the sophists. He, quote, criticizes him. Okay, I would not call anything in the Socratic method critique at all. Look, I'm not a scholar. I didn't go to college. I can't back any of this up. But I'm telling you right now, my understanding, which seems pretty damn clear, actually, clearer the more I look into it, oddly enough, unless I was right all along, quite possible, because that happens. Maybe not as much as I would like, certainly, but it does happen. It is that the Socratic method is about questioning, not critiquing. There's a huge difference between those two. The gap is insurmountable, okay? To ask a question can be done out of ignorance. To critique is done from a place of authority or, you know, claimed authority and judgment, right? In order to critique, you must judge. Socrates does not seem to judge people at all. The Socratic method is not about judgment. It's about questioning. How do you know that? If I ask you how you know something, I am not critiquing you, right? I could have multiple motivations, by the way. We always miss this. We always think, oh, we saw something or we heard something, and therefore we know the motivation. It's like, well, if there was only one motivation, maybe, but there's almost never one motivation. So almost certainly no. If you have enough context, perhaps, if you have enough context and you're smart enough and you have a good enough memory and you're keeping good enough track of things, because those are different, by the way, maybe you can infer somebody's motivation, right? You can infer, oh, they asked that question because, but that's almost never the case when you're talking to anybody ever. Just to let you know, like, no, almost certainly no. Okay, so somebody asks you, how do you know that, right? Or what evidence do you have? That is not a critique. I'm sorry. It's not a critique. A critique is where you say, you did that because, well, that's a critique. Or you shouldn't have done that because, that's a critique, right? I'm not saying anything about the goodness or the badness of critique as such. I'm saying that Socrates doesn't critique. That doesn't seem to be what he does. I haven't read all of Socrates, or not that I remember. I could have when I was younger and just forgotten. That's quite possible. Even perhaps likely. The more I read this stuff, the more I go, either this stuff is really obvious to me anyway, or I've read at least some of it and inferred the rest. I know I didn't read the Republic, but until recently. You can see that. I'll link the Republic Book Club here. Why not? It was a wonderful book club. I learned a lot. I don't understand this idea of self-critique. I think it's invalid, and I don't understand this idea of self-transcendence. The reason why, even if you were critiquing, which I've just proven there's no evidence that there was any critique, we'll say, in what John was talking about, the reason why you can't critique yourself is because you can't see yourself. And so any critique you make of yourself is almost certainly wrong in an important way, right? And you'll see this with people all the time. They will blame themselves for things that didn't involve them at all, ever, and could not have involved them. Like, they'll blame themselves for things they had no control over. This happens all the time. So that's a self-critique. Okay, it's even a valid self-critique, because from their perspective, the fact that things didn't go the way they predicted means they have gotten something wrong. That's true, maybe, not all the time, but it could be true. I mean, it's valid to question that, certainly, to say, I went to do this thing and I tried to do it and it didn't work. Yep, that happens to everybody, by the way, in case you weren't thinking about it. But your view of yourself is flawed, and so your reasoning, actually, this is where logic, reason, rationality completely screw you over. Your reasoning about why that happened will probably be wrong, and this is why we need other people. Like, we just need other people. And that's why self-transcendence is bullshit, although it's bullshit for other great reasons too. Self-transcendence is bullshit. The idea itself doesn't make any sense, right? What are you transcending into? Not as in what's your goal, but like, what's the container? And I have a feeling I'm going to talk a lot about containers coming up here in my next commentary. Got a little hint of that today already. I haven't done the commentary yet. I was just talking to people about a very popular video that we're doing next, which is Peterson, Dawkins, and OConnor. Probably going to regret listening to OConnor again, but fair enough. My earlier commentary on him says it all. I didn't even do the whole video because, my goodness, probably would have lost my mind. It's important to recognize here what's happening, right? John has told his personal story. It's somewhat a sad story. It's incomplete, by the way. There are other pieces of his story out there that he didn't mention. Maybe he will later. And he's tied that into Emergence is good science fiction, sort of a tale. And he's tied that into credit for giving him a love of Socrates, who's he's placed as a love of Socrates, who he's placed at least at the level of what he abandoned, which is Jesus. So that places Jesus at the level of a sage, because that's the word he used. And now he said, Jesus and Socrates, and I won't give up Socrates. So that all happened here. I mean, you can just listen to it. It might take a couple listenings for you. I get that. If you don't get it right away, you gotta understand, this isn't the first time I've heard John talk like this. The first time I'm seeing this. And I actually like this concise version of the story, because I had to piece this together through lots of little pieces. So I'm happy it's all in one place now. This is very handy for people. Also, rewind if you've got to, listen to the story that he's telling, right? I just outlined it. And he's creating a false friction or opposition, opponent processing. That's what he likes for some reason, between Socrates and all other comers, East or West, right? So he's placed everything in opposition to what he views as the Socratic critique, which is fascinating. So when you think about that from a psychological perspective in particular, I think you're going to find that really fascinating.
Is there something about the essence of higher order meaning that is either analogous to or identical with self-correction?
I think that's the axial revolution. The axial revolution right? When people like Siddhartha or people like Socrates, is the recognition that our meaning-making machinery is actually also simultaneously the source of a lot of our suffering, and that simultaneously empowers us but challenges us, because think about the Dhammapada. The mind is the beginning of everything, and if like the greatest ally you can have is your mind, but the greatest enemy you can have is your mind, right? And so you get this tremendous,
because questioning improves, but it also destroys.
Right, exactly. And so you need a.
Wow, there's so much here. I don't even think I can cover it all. Just because it's like slipping out of my brain faster than I can even put it in little buckets. The mind is the source of it all. Boy, is that taken massively out of context, just to let you know. You couldn't take anything out of context more than that. It's not possible. Isolated and individualized something that was not spoken in any kind of context that resembles how it was spoken here. A lot of Eastern thought. That's what it's done. I linked the video earlier. You should check it out. We just take things out of context and say, and therefore. The idea that our sort of self critique is, our self critique or self questioning is generating meaning, or is part of the I don't know, the greater meaning. I don't know why we split meaning up. Don't do that. No. Stop splitting things, please. Stop sciencing everything. That would be great. No. I'm sorry, just no. No, Dr. Peterson, no. There's meaning, and it's outside of us. And the way that we are able to interface with it or interact with it or participate with it is the thing that generates it. Okay, so the way to look at it is there's a potential for meaning in the world if you accept that things don't come from the mind, right? That the mind was born into a larger container. We'll just call that the world or the universe or something. And that there are things outside of this, quote, mind, right? And that your participation, which is the thing that we'll say enables healthy relationship, is the thing that allows you to co-manifest meaning. And you're co-manifesting with the creation into which you were born. That, I think, is the easiest way to think about it. And meaning is part of that landscape, right? Meaning is part of the landscape of potentials that could manifest if you had proper relationship to creation. Oh, okay. So the creation is not static. We're not static. If the two of us sort of try to relate and get along, not opponently process or whatever John's talking about this week, then meaning manifests, and we kind of need meaning. Weird. Another way that we'll say people might look at this is the person is the meeting of heaven and earth. And therefore the meeting of heaven and earth is what affords meaning. Sure, I could go there. I don't prefer to, because I try to stay on the secular side, especially with these two. But also, they drug the Jesus in, so I think I'll drag him in too. So you can see how the framing that they're using, they can't use it, right? It doesn't work. Like, oh, this larger meaning. Like, what do you mean larger meaning? That doesn't make any sense. Meaning doesn't have a size. Come on, like, so. Your frame is broken. You're thinking about the world wrong. And now you're doubling up on definitions or trying to break out of definitions. Oh, so there's a personal meaning now. There's just such thing as personal meaning. Like, just stop. Just stop. Do you mean meaning from your personal perspective? Sure, there's a meaning from your personal perspective. But to meaning doesn't become personified, and it doesn't exist only in relation to you, right? Which is what personal meaning implies, right? There's meaning, there's you, and there's personal meaning, right? And yet that doesn't make any sense, and it can't be made any sense of. It slipped right past you, probably. Fair, I get it. Also, these are the sorts of tricks. Like, these are the things I'm used to. I see them all the time, or had seen them throughout my life with these sorts of people, with these sorts of degrees, and I'm very used to this talk. Unfortunately, maybe that's my cross to bear, listening to this garbage and actually seeing it all the time. So again, we're talking very much from our individuals are impossible. See any number of my videos where I keep insisting on this, outward. And there's nothing about where you are in the thing that pre-existed you that you're moving around in, for example. Talking like this just breaks my brain. I'm like, this is so, like, we just experienced this 24/7. Why do I have to word this? Why do I have to propositionalize this? What's going on? The age of gnosis, right? Propositions, the propositional tyranny. John's talked about that. Yes, please set me free from having to describe the experience of the fact that I'm not the biggest thing in the world or the only thing in the world, which is exactly how they're talking, right? I think that'll make it easier for you. Once you realize that these two, unfortunately, I love Dr. Peterson, but also, please stop, please. They always talk about the world as though it's from them as, quote, individuals, sort of cut off from everything in what I call objective material reality, outward. Listen with those ears. Right? They always do that. Sam Harris always does that, right? Dawkins, OConnor, they always talk this way. All of them. Dennett, they always talk that way, right? And then they're trying to, emergence is good, right? Ooh, we've got the science fiction emergence stuff, right? They're trying to emerge their way into a bigger thing. It's like, yeah, but you were already in the bigger thing. So really all you're doing is exploring the bigger thing. That's right. And that's the difference between, we'll say, Anglo-Catholics who are steeped in their religion, right, who are living it out, we'll say, participating in liturgies, part of a tradition, right, have a book that just gives them a bunch of propositions that they're supposed to sort of understand axiomatically and read symbolically, or experience symbolically, maybe is a better way to say it. And people who are scientistic, right, and individualistic and materialistic and objective, right? They're trying to live in an objective material reality. Einstein's relativity theory, I'm not kidding, actually says even if there's an objective material reality, it's pointless and you can't use it because you'll never inhabit that space. And basically Einstein's a believer in God, rather explicitly, by the way. And he says God doesn't play dice with the universe, for example. So the position of objective material reality is the position of God. That's what it is. And you're not there. So anytime anybody's pretending to be there, like these two are in this whole conversation, they are technically playing God. Fairly sure, I heard somewhere, I didn't read the book, but I heard there was a book that said don't do that somewhere. But it would have been handy to write down, 2,500 years ago or something. And maybe somebody would read it. I don't know.
Figure that is like Socrates, he's open to following the logos. Wisdom begins in wonder, but there's tremendous courage. He demonstrates it unto death. Death.
Yeah.
This is tremendously encouraging that was tremendously encouraging for me. And so I got caught up in this, and then I wanted to follow this, accept academic philosophy at the time, after first year, stops talking about wisdom and the love of wisdom. And you get into all of these arguments about meta ethics and meta, epistemology, and those are useful tools. They're useful for science. And so I kept going on for that reason, but this hunger was not being satisfied. So literally down the street from me, there was a Tai Chi meditation center. So I went there because I decided to give Eastern philosophy, because I've been reading some Hermann Hesse, a chance. And I started practicing Tai Chi Chuan and practicing Vipassana and Metta. I was introduced to Lao Tse. I was introduced to Siddhartha. And so these things opened me up. And around that time, I was started to read Pierre Hadot and how our ancient philosophy, the Stoics and the Epicureans and the Neoplatonists and the skeptics, they also practiced philosophy as a way of life. And then I started to realize how much this overlapped with early Christianity and some forms of existing Christianity. It started to help me a rapprochement to Christianity and to religion, because I became very
Well, you've always you
Okay. So, man, I'm never going to get through this video. Never going to get through this video. This is utterly fascinating. This is fascinating. So what I want you to note here, because you probably missed it, is that what John was describing there was, oh yeah, I went into these Eastern philosophies. Okay. And then he describes Eastern religions and practices, right? And then he goes back and says, well, there were these practices in Western philosophy. Well, you have to have a pretty broad definition of philosophy at that point. Okay, so I've said this before, I'll say it again. As near as I can tell, and I've talked to PhDs about this in this field, by the way, ancient Greek philosophy is what we call science. That's what it is, right? Philosophy for the ancient Greeks is the bucket into which you put other buckets, or ontologies. So there's all the things that aren't ontologies or ontologible or something, right? Can't be put in an ontology. And then there's the things that can. We call those things philosophy, and then subdivide them and say, okay, well, there's a bucket of natural philosophy. That's roughly most of what we call science, right? And then there's buckets of this philosophy and that philosophy. That's why it's invalid to say the philosophy of science. No, you're saying philosophy, natural philosophy. No, don't say that. That's wrong. It's silly and crazy, and it's self-referential and self-refuting. When you start to understand the world that way, you realize, oh, that's why the Republic's written the way it's written, with all the references in it to the gods. They're strewn throughout the text, like they're everywhere. Also, it ends with the story of a resurrection, which, you would think people would mention that more often. And by ends, I mean ends. It's a rather strange way to end a text. These facts are not trivial or merely correlative. Okay, there's something going on here. Okay, when you have practices, right, then you're straying into religious territory. Philosophy is a lot of yak, even in ancient Greece. And then there's two types of sort of people that are yakking, right? The true philosophers, this is in the Republic, and the sophists. And the sophists are the bad guys. They're below the actors. Can you imagine anything below an actor? The actors are duplicitous. They're liars. Like, that's their job. It's not necessarily bad, but also be careful. This is an important way to understand what's happening here, right? Because what he's saying is, I'm comparing apples and oranges. Yep, you're comparing apples and oranges. It's exactly what you're doing. You've rejected Christianity. You didn't find what you wanted in Socrates, fair, or in Plato, fair, or in Aristotle, absolutely fair. You didn't, because you already rejected it, right? And then I went to the East and picked up their religions and called them Eastern philosophical traditions, which they are not. It's not that those don't exist. It's that things he's describing are not. Lao Tzu, maybe. But also, did you read it? All these religious references to creation, right? That the arguments are based on. Weird, just like in the West. Very strange. Anyway, moving on. And so you see this in something like Pythagorean school. So a lot of what Plato talks about is taken directly from Pythagoras and his crazy cult. And they were crazy. They were definitely crazy people. So you see that the line between religion and philosophy is blurred quite often. You see that also in the people that John would refer to, although again, invalid category, as Neoplatonists, right? And so once you sort of understand that, it's like, oh, okay, so the difference is participation. That's the difference between philosophy and religion, right? Also, you only need the participation. You don't need the propositions at all. Oh, Catholics understand this well. I think the Orthodox understand this well too. I could be wrong, but I think Anglo-Orthodoxy gets it, right? Like, you can live in the woods and, you know, not be able to speak any language at all and have no human interaction and still become a saint. Like, this isn't a problem, right? Because you're acting out, participating in, because that's what religion is. It's participation, among other things, but also the fundamental part is participation in the world properly, right? And when you're participating in the world properly, you're part of Anglo-Orthodoxy, as I'm calling it. Not necessarily Christianity, because the pagan heretic Protestants don't believe any of this for the most part. A few of them did. Maybe some of the Reformed, for example. You're welcome, Bruce. Maybe some of the Reformed sort of understand this in the way we'll say that the Anglo-Orthodox do. But most of the Protestants are the book and you and God sort of thing, and the five solas. 5 things that are alone. Weird. How do you have 5 things and they're all alone? Sounds disconnected in either case. So they don't have access to this idea. So they can't do that. They also don't have saints, but like, they can't do this trick. Where the Anglo-Orthodox have no problem doing that. They're like, yeah, well, this is how the world is, man. I don't know what to tell you, right? That's a fundamental difference. But I wanted you to see the apples and oranges comparison, because most people will miss it. Because Westerners tend to reduce the East to philosophies and ignore that they have religion too. Not that they don't have philosophy, but also fair, you want to draw the line somewhere in the East, draw that same line in the West. Now we'll have a conversation about how confused you are about the world, because you will be. I know it's easy for you to say, I've actually had these discussions many, many times, well over 100 times, with academics and non-academics alike. Sorry, I've had these discussions. These are not new ideas for me. These are not new discussions for me. The ideas I'm giving you were developed partially and partially given to me from others. These are not like Mark's unique ideas that he popped into his, no. And they're not first time. It's not like, oh, I ran into John Vervaeke, and no. These predate these two by years. So decades, in fact. So yeah, it's an easy thing to fall into, because we don't know much about the East. I don't know anywhere near as a fifth of what I'd like to know about the East, but I know this because I studied this part. So it's easy to fall into the trap. Don't fall into the trap. He's comparing apples and oranges. He's comparing religions and philosophies.
You've always struck me at your core as a religious thinker. That's partly because you're grappling with deep ideas, and that's the same thing. But
you're right, and
it's one of the things that distinguished you from, say, the other professors that were at the University of Toronto, but the professorate in general. And I also think it accounts to some degree for your impact on students.
I think that's true. My around
point of order, why thank you, Jordan, is the proper response before you start thinking Canadians are polite.
This the episode I did for Awakening to the Meaning Crisis on Agape, I had Christian ministers like Paul Vanderklay said, that was one of the best presentations of Agape. And then
define that for everyone.
So other than sort of desire, there's three kinds of love. Eros is the love that is accomplished by consummation. So I don't mean this in some creepy Freudian sense, but I can have Eros for a cookie because I become one with the cookie by eating it. And we consummate a marriage, right? And you consummate a relationship in sexual intercourse. And then there's philia, and this is the love that is born out of reciprocity. This is friendship love. This is the love that emerges and affords dialogos. That's why it's philia sophia. It's the dialogical love of wisdom together. And then there is the love that a parent has for a child. You don't love a child because you want to be one with the child. That's exactly the wrong project. You're trying to make the project autonomous from you.
Yeah.
And of course, your child isn't your friend when you bring the child home from the hospital. They can't do anything. They're not even a cognitive agent. They're a moral person, but they're not a cognitive agent.
Yeah.
You love a child. It's like this magic. You love them because by loving them, you turn them into a full-blown cognitive agent. It's like if I could stare at a sofa and turn it into a Ferrari. It's that kind of, and in that sense, it is the most fundamentally profound, creative, we're not just creating meaning, we're creating the beings that participate in meaning, that, as you indicated earlier, could disclose some of the most fun, because they're at the apex of emergence, right? That they can disclose some of the most fundamental aspects of reality. So agape is the deep recognition of that in that sort of voluntary necessity and being compelled to draw into it. And Jesus is...
All right. Wow, we're moving really fast. So I had to pause it here. I apologize. Also, preachery sort of pause. I love it. John said a lot there. So the way John said this in the past, just to let you know, is that agape is the way that we bring a baby into personhood or being, right? He said both, by the way. I just want to be clear. I don't want to. I want to give you the impression that I'm adding terms here. He said both separately and together, incidentally. I'm glad that he talked about Pastor Paul. John's talks with Pastor Paul are fascinating, by the way. He's had quite a few. They're very interesting. I think that this ties back to the other commentary that I did, right? John had said previously, why do you care if the creator of the universe cares about you? Well, because then they can have agapic love towards you, which makes you a being. That might be a reason, John, and that's, perfectly commensurate with your statement here, right? Which is how people do it. I thought his move of turning a couch into a Ferrari was strange because that's turning material into other material. We do that all the time, right? Not couches into Ferraris, but also, in one, before that he invoked magic. Okay, I'm like, sure, I'm on board with that word, that usage of that word in that context. But then he goes to material instead of material to being, right? Or material to person, which is what he started talking about. So it's a little weird that he's kind of not talking that way in essence. This idea that there's a dialogical relationship that causes this, I don't know where that, this is first I've heard of that. I don't understand that. But, the idea too that we're at the pinnacle of an emergence. Okay. I think I mentioned this before about like if somebody wrote down a warning not to play creator or a god, that would be handy and maybe somebody would read it. I mean, you couldn't be making a more clear statement of playing God than saying we are the pinnacle of emergence. That doesn't even make any sense. First of all, no, we're not. Like, I don't. Let me tell you how I know that, right? In case it isn't completely obvious. I get it if it's not completely obvious. I'm not poking fun, but also if there were more than one of us, something would emerge above us as the result of more than one of pinnacles of emergence. Right. And then we wouldn't be the pinnacle of emergence anymore. That thing would. And I know everyone's playing fast and loose with the you and the we thing. I get that. But it matters. It matters a lot. When you frame it as, oh, because agape, we are the pinnacles of emergence. So where did agape come from? Below? Like what agaped us up to the pinnacle of emergence? And in what space is the pinnacle of emergence located? And what was there before? Like, these are all valid questions that are like, how are you going to answer these? These seem like really big questions now. I mean, they didn't seem significant before, but now, right? And then when you frame it like that, you in your head, because you're one person, see you at the pinnacle of something. That's what you see. I mean, that's what he said. Like, that's what you're going to project. Fair. No. Sorry, bro. Maybe you see many me's or many different people. You and many different people at the pinnacle of some. Oh, wait a minute. You can't have multiple things at the pinnacle of something unless you all are at, we'll say, a plateau or a layer above something else, and their pinnacle is somewhere above you. Okay, that would work. But then you're not the pinnacle anymore, even if you're using the plural form of you or all the we's, that then you're not the pinnacle. So then, yeah. See the problem? So we can use the logic, the reason, and rationality to say, no, this is gobbledygook garbage talk. See how I did that? Right. And it's hard to catch because, look, man, I want to be at the pinnacle of emergence. Sounds great. Sign. Where do I sign? Sign me up. I'll get a pen. Like, not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That would make me God or creator or supreme being or whatever. Pinnacle. I would, from now on, refer to me as pinnacle. Don't do that. First of all, I'll die laughing. And then you'll have to be sad. Oh, man. So you can see how absurd this is. And yes, I know the tricks. I know where these arguments end because I've heard them many times. Isn't the first two people to go down this road? More like the trillionth or something, but whatever. Let's see if we can continue onward here. But like, fair if you didn't catch it. I get it. Like, it's very easy to get sucked into these things when you're cognitively overloaded. So I get it.
Is right. Jesus, in the Epistle of John, God is agape. Jesus is the sage of that. Think about what agape means. Jesus,
the sage of agape. What? That doesn't even make any sense. Is he a sage? Maybe, but he's more like the manifestation of agape. That might be a better way to think about it. And it, as a manifestation of agape, he may have the qualities of a sage. That's what I would go with, and I'm no theologian, so don't listen to me about that. But also, don't listen to John.
Comes and the agapic way, the most excellent way, as Paul says. Agape says, to the Roman people in the Roman Empire, we can take all the non-persons of the Roman Empire, all the women, all the children, all the widows, all the slaves, all the impoverished, all the non-Romans, and we can make them into persons because we live the most excellent way of agape. And agape is the God power that turns non-persons into persons.
And that conquers the Roman Empire.
Wow. Okay. Who's the we in this scenario? Can you do that? Is that what Christianity said? Is that how the Romans viewed the Roman world? Now, I'm definitely no expert because I failed every freaking term of Latin I ever took. But also learned a lot of history trying to learn Latin in junior high and high school. My understanding from reading Latin writings written back when Rome was like the world, or at least a reasonable approximation of it, according to the West, is that it's not that they weren't persons, and it's not that persons didn't have, we'll call them inherent rights that might be even the way they thought about it, although that's much harder to work out. It depends on a lot of translational issues and interpretation issues, both, which are separate, by the way. It's that citizens, so he just described all the non-citizens, citizens had a enhanced set of rights, and non-citizens had fewer rights. Okay, a lot of this stuff came from Greece, not Rome. By the way, the Romans kind of stole it. Romans steal everything. Not that they don't innovate, but also they steal everything. They're very clever at this. They're very good at it. It's actually a very good trait. Like, oh yeah, take the good stuff. That's for sure. Take everybody's good stuff. Yup, you should do that. You should, don't physically steal, but like steal their good ideas. That is a quite a different statement. I know we like to romanticize, we'll say, the current, the present, by making the past barbaric, because we do that all the time, actually. That chronological snobbery, I think it's Chesterton talked about that. But actually, the picture is nowhere near that gruesome in Rome. It really is citizenry. It conveys a set of rights on you. I mean, this is this is one of the reasons why Starship Troopers, if I can speak, went over so well as a movie, even though it was trying to be a mockery, is because the point stands. Citizenship is earned. Now, the Romans had what we would now consider a ridiculous way of determining citizenship, although slaves could become citizens, and women owned property in ancient Rome. Hate to break it to you. Ancient Greece, too, by the by, just to let you know. And Egypt. But we'll glance right past that modern misconception. And there is a point to be made about, we'll say, the lack of equality in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Ancient Greece is far worse, by the way. Far worse. All these wonderful philosophers, I'm like, boy, they don't meet modern Western standards. The Romans come a lot closer. A lot closer. It was a lot easier to become a citizen in Rome than it was in any of the Greek city-states, or maybe most of the Greek city-states. And I mean, their full range is in Greece, right? You've got Sparta, where they have the Helots, which are basically slaves that they breed. And Athens, where, people can kind of move in and become head of the navy and stuff. It runs the gamut. All those experiments have been done by Greece, right? What we now call Greece, the Greek city-states, and in other places, but like Greece did them all, I think, the crazy Greeks. Rome is a different case, but also, like, you never hear the negative case against Greece. I'm like, really? It's way worse in Greece. Way worse. So we have to kind of take that into account. This is a very sample biased way of talking about the ancient world. And they weren't, total heartless barbarians that believed that women weren't persons. Like, that has basically never happened in the history of the world to any culture that has survived with writing. That's important to know.
Empire.
And that's why
And the whole ancient world.
and that's
Yeah.
why it conquers the Roman Empire, right? And precisely. And my partner.
I want to just quick note. So me, right here, this guy, used to have a frame of the world wherein I thought, well, one reasonably good, and I'm not saying it's not a reasonably good way, but one reasonably good way of thinking about what happened with Rome is that Rome got conquered by Christianity, and so the Roman Empire lives on in the form of the Roman pontiff. Okay. As far as I can remember, I could be totally fooling myself here, right? It could be self BS all day long. I fully acknowledge. I thought I derived that myself, right? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, actually, right? We've got the Roman pontiff who sits at the seat of Rome, and, you know, but we had the Roman emperor, and he just kind of swapped the two out, right? Now, of course, you look at the historical timeline, that becomes sort of a problem, except you see Rome moves out of, quote, Italy, which it wasn't back then. There was no Italy. Over to Byzantium, right, to Constantinople, gets conquered by Christianity, and then moves back. Okay, little weird if that's your sort of your framing for Roman Empire. It's not a great framing. Also, again, it's it's not horrible or anything. So I did want to point that one out because I thought that's interesting. That's the framing that John seems to be using here. Of course, I don't think that's, we'll say, the best way to think about what happened is probably not conquest, because conquest didn't occur. The Romans did themselves in, probably due to their pagan practices, right? And their pagan practice became unsustainable, even in a better fortified area after they got away from, we'll say, the human corruption of Rome. The pagan practices continued, even though they were refined pagan practices by that point, to corrode, and eventually Constantinople had no choice but to adopt better religious practices or cease to exist as a culture. That, I think, is a much better way to think about these things.
Sarah, who's not a Christian, right? And I don't profess to be one, but she took me aside at one point and she said, and I want this understood, that I'm saying this at an arm's length, okay? And you're a good friend, so I'll trust you for that. But she said, you're actually the only real Christian I've ever met.
Mm-hmm. And what did she mean by that?
And well, of course I asked her.
Yeah, right.
And she said, because she said, I get it. You don't identify with a set of doctrines, but you try to live agape, and you try to follow
embody it. Yeah.
Embody, and you try to follow the logos, and you've structured your whole life and the cultivation of your character around that. And
right.
you try
that's what belief. That's belief.
To give your heart to. That's what. That's the original
definitely.
meaning.
It's to stake your life on it. That's why I have.
Okay. I think I talked about this earlier, right? The idea of, quote, Christianity or Anglo-Cathodoxy, more precisely, is that what you live out has nothing to do with the book or the set of beliefs or a set of professions or, quote, confessions. If you're Protestant, you've hijacked that word and misused it horribly to destroy the world. Please don't do that. Please stop. It has nothing to do with the faith, with belief. Peterson's made this point a zillion times. You don't believe what you say, you believe what you act out. Religion is about participation. It's about how you act in the world. That is your belief. What's in a book is not your belief, because that's a book. That's a set of propositions. Okay? What you read aloud to others is not your belief. Those are propositions. They might be contracts, they might be promises, there might be statements, right? There might be hopes, there might be dreams, they could be lots of things. But they're not belief, because belief is what you act out. So I just wanted to make that, and not to harp on it, but I said that. I said that earlier. Weird.
A certain amount of problem with the reduction of belief to the proposition.
Propositional tyranny. That's what it is.
Well, it's also, it's propositional tyranny, but it's also it's a substitution. It's like well, now I've got the propositions down. You know, and I talked to some evangelists.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jordan. Dr. Peterson, this is wonderful. I really like that framing. It's not just a tyranny, it's a substitution. I am going to have to note that in one of my notes, in fact, because that's quite good. It's a substitution. You're substituting the propositions for the belief, which means, because belief is what you act out, you're also substituting your propositions for your actions. Right, which means either you don't have to act and you can still believe, which is impossible, right? Or you can act any way you want and still believe, you know, that you're a moral and virtuous creature or something. Right. So once you split those two in that way, it's not a problem. But when you substitute one for the other, now problems occur, right? Because if you speak about your belief and you fail, you could be mistaken, you could be misinterpreting, you could be a poor speaker, right? You could be inarticulate or poorly articulate, or you could be sinning. But when you substitute one for the other, now problems arise. Two very big, important insights for me in this video. So I'm glad I'm doing this. This is fantastic. This is really going to help forward my work for sure. That idea of substitution is.
In Washington, I know some very, very wise evangelicals in Washington. They do remarkable work. They're involved in the prayer breakfast there and have been for decades, really committed people. And we were having a very serious conversation one day about the errors, let's say, of the evangelical movement, one of them being the substitution of the propositional for the existential. And the counting of souls, you know, the number of people who accept the propositional creed, which isn't nothing, you know.
It's necessary, but it's not sufficient.
It's also maybe one way that the propositional can echo down through the emotions and the motivations and become something embodied. But there's a large journey from the purely propositional, let's say the Apostles' Creed, to actually embodying.
There are so many. We mentioned this earlier. This is Pageau. This is Socrates. This is Plato, through and through. There are truths that are only disclosed to you after you go through fundamental transformation. And that is different from assenting to a proposition because you have been convinced of its truth. That is a very different. See, this is the Cartesian problem. The Cartesian project is, here's a universal method that does not require you to undergo existential transformation. You just apply the universal method. It will give you access to all the universal propositional truths, and that's all we need. And that is a big mistake. This is why I practice a form of cognitive science that emphasizes that. I have a new paper out. I think I shared it with you. Why relevance realization is not computational, because ultimately you can't capture all of that relevance realization, all that binding, all that transformation, all that meaning making in a formal set of propositions. It's just not going to do it for you.
Right.
Well, that's actually kind of weird. So the quote Cartesian mistake is a process problem. Not all processes are computation or result in computation. All computation can be reduced to processes, though. So just a little asymmetry there people don't notice. It's just kind of weird speak, because a lot of John's project, I can just tell you, is procedural. It's procedural. And there's a fundamental difference between acting things out, we'll say, and merely talking about them, and having, we'll say, a process or a formula. This whole thing about truths not being revealed until you transcend is crazy talk. Piaget was a developmental psychologist, if I'm remembering correctly. Development isn't about self-transcendence. Development is about the fact that you change over time, and as you change, hopefully you are formed well. That's what I'm whining about with education, is formation, not education, or at least not the definition people seem to be using. If you are formed well, you have more truths available to you. That will not ever give you the availability of all the truths, by the way. Something about playing God, can't remember. But that's okay. But that's not self-transcendence either. I don't know that Socrates believed in self-transcendence. He certainly seems to think that's on the sophist side. That's the way I remember him talking about this stuff. So I don't know where John gets that from. Plato doesn't believe in self-transcendence. He denies it's possible in the Republic. That's the allegory of the cave. Go watch my video on Lives of Plato's Cave, man. Plato says you can't self-transcend. He says you can't even transcend if somebody drags you to do it. And he says even if you could, it would be painful. And even if you did, you'd get lonely, because you'd be alone, by the way. Ooh, nobody mentioned that, right? And then if you tried to go be unlonely and go find your friends again because you'd be lonely, they'd kill you. I don't know. I don't think Plato's down with this idea at all. Not according to the Republic. I don't know where John's getting this. I have no idea. I mean, maybe he has references. He could back it up. But I'm flummoxed by this claim. Completely. I feel like a truck ran over me. Where'd you get that from?
Right. So, yeah. Well, that's an extension of the argument that the propositional isn't sufficient.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so now, personally, you wandered through the gospel seminars with us, and you've been investigating the idea of the logos, and you've been doing that from a cognitive science and a philosophical perspective.
And psychological.
And a psychological perspective. And you've had Jungian psychotherapy as well, so you're interested in the narrative end of that. What has that done to your understanding of Christianity? And I mean this in two ways, intellectually, but also personally.
I'll do the personally first.
Yeah.
Although it bears on the intellectual. So I
just want to point something out. Everything that happens to you personally bears on the intellectual, not the other way around, by the way. In other words, you can't rationalize people to change their personal behavior. You can't tell people drugs are bad for you, stop doing them. I'm not saying that never works, but it's completely unreliable. The opposite is not true, by the way, at all. You have a personal experience, it affects you intellectually. Now, there are two ways it can affect you. It can either change you intellectually, or you can experience what's called cognitive dissonance. Right. I suspect, maybe I should put this in my notes, that a lot of the meaning crisis is cognitive dissonance related. So that's something worth thinking about.
I'm very cautious of the fact that I shouldn't ever come to the conclusion that my intellectual or philosophical assessment is somehow swinging free of my idiosyncratic bias that has come from my own personal background.
Right.
Okay, so that's why I have, and sincerely, by the way, and with affection, especially for a lot of people like Jonathan and Paul, I take and I think I showed it in the gospel seminar. I showed it to Bishop Barham, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, very, not even more than respectful. I'm open. I'm listening. I want to hear. Right. So, but on the personal, like I said, what it did for me is it's almost like Kierkegaard's thing. I realized I'm not going to ever return to Christendom, but maybe and I don't mean to be offensive to any Christians here. I'm trying to answer your question honestly.
Yeah.
But I've found a way to follow the logos towards agape and towards wisdom and towards ultimate reality. And I mean in a sacred sense that's, ultimately real, ultimately transformative, ultimately ontonormative, the most real and the most relevant. God.
Okay. I don't understand this ultimate, why are we creating new categories or putting modifiers on terms? I don't understand that move. That's a bad move. When people do that, you should start questioning them. What do you mean ultimate reality? Are there true realities and non-ultimate reality and an ultimate reality? Like, what are you saying? I just don't know what you're saying. Like, I'm not saying it's wrong. I just don't know what it is anymore. And it's very confusing. But it sounds pleasing. Like, oh, I can know ultimate reality, not just normal reality like those other people. That's why it's pleasing, because it makes your ego happy. Don't make your ego happy. Your ego is a little bit of a bastard, to be honest. Don't do that. So, I mean, I think this is good to note. Also, like, I don't understand this follow the logos. Can we define the logos? I mean, I understand they've tried to give definitions before. I've been completely unsatisfied with all of them. I don't think they comport with, we'll say, a theological definition of the logos. At least not the ones I'm familiar with, and I'm not that familiar, so fair enough. Maybe I'm wrong. That's cool, whatever. But what is this logos? What is it that you're following? Where did it come from? Is the logos goodness or something? Like, are you following goodness, or is what you're following good? Right? Or does it lead to good? Like, these are all open questions in my mind that I'm like, but why are we doing this? Like, what's the purpose of following the logos? Or are we retroactively defining logos as the thing that gives you access to ultimate reality? Because that sounds like what we're doing, to be quite honest. That would be unfortunate, because that's not helpful, at least to me, and probably not to anybody else. And again, these guys have a long conversation going for decades, and there's a bunch of context we don't have, which again is why I don't like this conversation, because that context is not being explained or brought out. And sometimes, Dr. Peterson stopping Dr. Vervaeke and saying, can you explain agape, right? And things like that. But again, what's this logos thing? Where I got to know a lot more, like 2 hours of description more probably. Like, this is really important. This foregone conclusion that following the logos is good and no definition of what it is or where it came from or how it came to be or why it's important to follow it even. These would be things you would, want to know.
God, if you would. All of that, and that's what my new series is going to be about. That has become very powerful for me. So,
well, I think what we'll do for everybody watching, listening, I think we'll continue this thread of conversation on the Daily Wire side, because, and this is what we're going to discuss, and maybe this will be an enticement to you as well to join us there. Whatever you're doing is very similar to what Paul Vanderklay is trying to do. It's very similar to what Bishop Barron is trying to do. And Jonathan. Yeah, it's similar to what Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Neil Ferguson are doing. Yeah. So there's something emerging. And part of the reason I'm really excited about Peterson Academy, by the way, is because I think that we can, at least in part, make it a center of whatever this is.
I'll tell you, Jordan, I came to the gospel seminar and I did the Peterson thing because I have, and I talked about this with my crew, I have a sense that that's a place where the advent of the sacred can be occurring.
Right. Well, that's the hope. And and so what I want to talk to you about on the Daily Wire side is I want to delve more into this idea that you just laid out in a way of a logos track that's parallel, because, and maybe we could do that by referring to the Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov.
Because, as long as we put it with notes from underground, which I just taught for a course. I did a course on literature and the meaning crisis, and so
you use notes. Yeah, well, good. Okay, we can pull that in too. That might be an interesting book to do a course on. That's one we could do together. That would be fun.
I did a course on Moby Dick, Heart of Darkness, Notes from Underground, Death in Venice, and the Plague.
One course.
Oh,
yeah, that's fun. All right, so everybody watching.
All right, I think that wraps up this video. Look, I don't recall them mentioning the word sacred earlier. What do you mean the sacred? I find this emergence talk fascinating. There's a thing emerging here, and a thing emerging here, and a thing emerging here, right? Interestingly, I would note, and so I'm going to spill everything now because I have to. I have no choice. I didn't think it would come to this. Certainly didn't think it would come to this on video. Paul Vanderklay, many years ago now, maybe 4, maybe more, probably before I even stumbled across his channel, has been talking about Jordan Peterson as an escalator that takes you to a certain place and drops you off, right? But there's nothing there to catch you. So if you want to characterize Jordan Peterson Wave 1 or whatever, I disagree with this. You can find videos on my channel about this, why I think this is a crazy way to think about Peterson. But it's not invalid or useless. It's just weird because he really hasn't changed that much. Peterson Wave 1 certainly grabbed people who were stuck or in trouble, the pragmatic end of the meaning crisis, and dropped them somewhere. That's sure. Paul Vanderklay's project was, well, maybe we should get a place to catch them, right? His reference is Billy Graham, which is interesting, by the way. I've been to the Billy Graham Library, which is not too far from my house. It's near the Charlotte Airport, actually, since I fly in and out of the Charlotte Airport. One day I stopped in there. That's a wild tale. You can find that on Paul Vanderklay's channel, by the way. It's on one of his live streams, maybe 2 of them, but definitely one of them. And it was early live streams too. I probably won't be able to link it here. If I find it, maybe I'll link it here. I might be out of links for the video. This is interesting that, well, they didn't mention Vanderklay's project, but fair enough. They probably don't know about it. Vanderklay is not doing a great job of advertising his project. One of the things that stood out to me early on was John's idea of the religion that's not a religion. This was the part of his work I disagreed with the most and found the most dangerous, right? Because you think you can just gin up a religion. Normally when people do that, we call it a cult. And some cults last a long time, like maybe Mormonism. But there's a long list of dead Protestant attempts to gin up a new Protestant denomination. This is the same project. These are people deeply steeped in the Protestant ethos here in North America, for better or for worse, mostly worse. And so the problem for me, especially with people like Paul Vanderklay, embracing Vervaeke's work, is that I viewed this very much as Paul Vanderklay using Vervaeke's science of meaning, right, which, is science around what Peterson did. So I found it unbelievably helpful. John's work is unbelievably helpful to me, made me a bunch of friends I never would have met any other way, for sure. Very grateful about this. But the religion that's not a religion gives you a way to justify creating your own religion. And so for me, the fact that Pastor Paul's church is dying, right, and his denomination is about to blow up, and he knows this. Like, he's known this for years. He's seen this coming. He's talked about this on his channel several times, right? And then he needs a justification, a scientific justification to do something different, because his whole denomination looks like it's going to blow up at the same issue that every other denomination, Protestantism, has blown up over, which is basically gay marriage. It's a little more complicated, but roughly speaking, it's gay marriage. You hit the gay marriage third rail, bang, your whole denomination explodes, right? That's just historically accurate and precise description of what's happened. If you say no, like the Catholics and the Orthodox generally do, then your church is intact. Could be a coincidence. I don't think so. So once you have this view, there's a danger there. And I think that very much John liked Pastor Paul because he wanted the religious or theological cover for his project. So that's how I view that relationship. I've been talking about this for years, sort of on my Discord server and on the previous Discord server I was on, which is Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server, by the way, which wasn't started by John, but he used to visit there twice a month, and then once a month. Those were lovely times. I very much miss those times. But these people are running cover for their own projects. And here's Peterson saying, oh, well, I think Peterson Academy is part of this whatever is emerging thing, which is fine, except the thing that emerges from, we'll say, communities that are forming around something bigger than themselves or bigger than their idea of self-transformation. Oh, you didn't catch that, did you? Probably not. Usually it forms a cult, right? Which is a failed attempt at a religion, right? Or it forms into an ideology, which is a religion without creation, right? It's one way to look at it. I'm not trying to give you like a hard and fast definition. So when you sort of see that, it's like, oh, cults usually have creation narratives, by the way. Ideologies do not. They're very secular. That's really the fundamental difference in my mind. I've come to that very recently, by the way. I don't want to pretend like I've been thinking of it this way for years. Nope, about a year. Why bother thinking about ideology? Yeah, ideology bad, move on, right? Now it's an issue because it looks like new ideologies are forming, new cults are forming, new religions are emerging. That's bad. I don't think religions emerge in that way, we'll say, and they certainly don't last when they do. That's the story of Protestantism since Protestantism, and the story of the Catholic Church before that, and the story of the Orthodox Church before that, right? So, yes, these are problems, and this is certainly happening. I don't know why an academy that teaches knowledge or purports to convey facts or give you information or however you want to frame it has anything to do with A, anything sacred, and B, anything to do with the meaning crisis. I think if anything, that's more of a cause than a solution. It might be merely a symptom, depending upon how you define it. So maybe I'll have to work on my meaning crisis definition stuff, which I'm working on anyway for a different project. Coming soon, hopefully. This is important to understand and notice and recognize. There's lots of people trying to emerge the same project. And Peterson wants to be a hub for that. And Vervaeke senses that and wants in on the deal. Fair enough. What is their project? Why would you need to reinstantiate the sacred? And what is sacredness associated with, we'll say, symbolically? These are going to be important questions. I have been planning a video about this. Sorry for all of my distractions, but also this is hard work. A lot of these people are using solutions which are fundamentally feminine. What the world needs is more wisdom. Wisdom is typically portrayed as a feminine archetype, or one aspect of a feminine archetype is probably the best way to say it. A lot of people want to solve the problem by, say, putting more women in politics. And that's going to solve the political problem. We'll have fewer wars, which is antithetical to all the data, which says women cause more wars than men when they're in charge. Just saying. Other people want to do the Gaia worship thing, right? Worship the climate. The earth is fundamentally seen as feminine in most symbologies. So what you're seeing is this idea that somehow the feminine archetype or the divine feminine archetype is broken and needs to be reinstantiated or reintroduced into the world in a way. That's the same as saying the sacred in some sense, because it is the divine feminine which represents and creates the sacred space, we'll say, from which we are born. This is very similar to, if not the same as, rediscovering creation as such. So I know that was a lot. Maybe you can't parse any of it. Fair. Like, cool, man. I've been thinking about this a long time. This is a lot of work done by a lot of people that have helped me to be able to communicate this. In some cases for them, because they're not my ideas. But I wanted you to see that. And I wanted you to understand this push towards the feminine, and that there is this emergence, and what they're trying to emerge, for better or for worse, is going to look like an attempt at a religion. It could either end as a cult or an ideology, but that's its most likely ending, by the way. I don't recommend this. I think there are sort of steps in between that can be taken to get people into existing structures rather than building new structures. We don't need new structures. We have too many structures. We have too many new structures. That's the flood, if you want to think of it that way. So look, I didn't expect to end it that way. I understand that, especially this last section, is a lot. Take notes. Go back and listen again if you have to. Put in some comments. Tell me what you want videos on, what you need videos about in terms of detail, and I'll try to do them. No promises, but also I have a 100% batting rate so far, I think, for requests. I don't know, out of what I just said, how translatable or interpretable or understandable any of that is. So I leave it to you, dear viewer. Comment on the video and let me know if you want me to expound upon any of that. And do watch my early model videos, because I think that gives you a pathway to sort of understand what I'll call, even though I don't particularly like this term, the progression that we've been seeing in the world. And of course, it's not a progression of the world as such. It's a progression of people in the world. And so you'll see all stages of that progression in those early model videos. There's a whole playlist of them, right in the world right now. You'll see people stuck at phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, etc. Right? You'll see that, I think. And if you don't, fair enough, then it's my failure. Blame me. Comment and tell me this is dumb, or I don't get it, or more, whatever you need. So that's my ask of you for all this work that I had to do. And I don't know if I'll record it today, but I'm going to do the Peterson Dawkins OConnor talk next. I don't know when that will be done or when any of this will get released, but hopefully we'll definitely be living in a different world the day after this is recorded, because this is election day here in the United States, Guy Fawkes Day, I believe, over in the UK, or in England in particular. So thank you very much for sitting through all this with me. Please give me some feedback so I know, where I'm going and what I'm doing here, and share this with your friends if it's helpful, because this is a lot of work. It would be better if tens of thousands of people were benefiting. I don't regret any of it, but also let's make this a little more popular. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention.